a question regarding 1 through 8 seeding versus divisional. I wanted to get your take on the current playoffs platform. Personally, I think the 1 through 8 playoff format should be brought back. The division champions would have the top seeds in each conference, and after the first round, the remaining teams get reseeded by conference. So, when it comes to divisional seeding, I only hear negative, and partially rightfully so. I think 1 through 8 is the right call for the league to go back to. It just makes the most sense. I'll get into that. But there's far too much negative regarding divisional. There are some positive aspects. So although I'm not getting paid by Gary Bettman, I do kind of want to show the positive aspects. So we're going to do some pros and cons regarding divisional and all that. So we're going to go over the current divisional system pros and cons. First off, the first pro for the current divisional system is the travel. What do I mean by that? It's not that much of a big deal. I'm about to show a map. It's not that big of a deal in the Eastern Conference, but in the Western Conference, travel is a major thing between divisions. You look at it, look at Vancouver versus Nashville. That is a 4.5-hour flight. That Pacific Northwest versus that Southern, Midwest, Chicago, St. Louis, that is massive. That is a 4-hour flight at the bare minimum. So when it comes to playoffs, when game 5, 6, 7, you're traveling every other day, getting on a flight, 2-hour time differences, going back and forth. That's a big deal. That does make sense as to why the divisional format does make some sense. The fact that you're not doing this prolonged travel the first 2 rounds most of the time. Obviously, wild card can kind of flub that up with the 1 seeds in the wild card. But for the most part, the travel does make sense in terms of players not having to travel so far, owners not having to pay for 5-hour private jet rides. Not that big of a deal in the Eastern Conference, obviously. Most of the teams are in the Northeast and then the 2 Florida teams. But in the Western Conference, that is a valid reason as to why it is bad. Moving on to the number 2 reason. Number 2 reason. Easier to market rivalries. Easier to market rivalries. Okay, I don't know why it took so long with that. But when you look at it, what are you as a fan? Let's plop you back down into 2016. What are you more likely to watch? The Pittsburgh Penguins versus the Florida Panthers, or the Pittsburgh Penguins versus the Washington Capitals? With this divisional setup, because of geography, because of the amount of times that these teams play each other, there are far better rivalries through the divisional system than in the first round. Without a doubt, I'd rather watch Battle of LA, Battle of Alberta than Vancouver Canucks versus the Nashville Predators. There's nothing there in terms of divisional. You're most of the time, you're going to have far better first and second round matchups, which is a big deal for the NHL in terms of TV ratings. Look at it this year. In the divisional system, obviously, sometimes there is wild card versus a team in a different division. The worst matchup of the first round was the Vegas Golden Knights versus the Winnipeg Jets, in part because there's no real story there. There's no real rivalry there. It's obviously Vegas is a new team, so that is kind of weird. But like that I wasn't staying up till 10:30 or starting at 10:30, staying up till 1 a.m. to watch that series because there was no divisional juice. There was no rivalry there. And as a result, and also just the Vegas Golden Knights were the far better team. But I was watching LA Kings versus the Edmonton Oilers every night because those teams have bad blood. So in terms of marketing rivalries, it does matter for the NHL. It results in bigger TV ratings because in the first and second round, it's very matchup determining. The matchups determine the TV ratings in the sense that this year, I think the Leafs versus the Lightning or Devils versus Rangers was like the highest watch series in all of the NHL in terms of US numbers, which makes sense. Devils versus Rangers first round. So having that key matchup be in the first round obviously helps. The first and second rounds, having those rivalries help the TV ratings a lot. Obviously, once you get to the Eastern Conference in the Stanley Cup Finals and the Western Conference Finals, those matchups sell themselves because the stakes are so high. There's a trip to the Stanley Cup Final on the line. There's a Stanley Cup Final on the line in the Stanley Cup Final. Saying Stanley Cup Final way too much right now. But so those matchups sell themselves. But some of these first round matchups, for example, Winnipeg Jets versus the Vegas Golden Knights, those ratings absolutely tank because there's no juice between those two teams. So in terms of Gary Bettman wanting the best possible matchups, the divisional system, it does really benefit that. Another current divisional system pro is divisions should matter. They should matter. What do I mean? Oh my God. Divisions should matter. What do I mean by that? I mean that you play your division teams more. You play your division teams about 3 to 4 times a year in the schedule, and then you play the other team in that division, other team in that conference, the other division 2 to 3 times a year. So if you're playing the teams in your division more, you should be rewarded in terms of maybe getting home ice because of that. That's why I agree with Anton that if we went back to 1 through 8, I think the 2 division winners should be the top 2 seeds because winning your division, there should be a real incentive to. 1 through 8 is fantastic, but I think I don't like the idea of a division winner being the 4 seed because, again, they beat their division. They play their division more. If we didn't have divisions, at that point, if we're going just flat 1 through 8, why do we even have divisions? So there's divisions for a reason. Right now, I think the current divisional system maybe values them far too much, but I think there should be some value in the decisions. So I think that 1 2 seeds should matter because you do play your division more. Obviously, now we're going to go into the cons. Obviously, the number one con, it punishes teams in deeper divisions. This is really like the nail in the coffin as to why, the main thing as to why I think we should go back through 1 through 8, or at least something with the conference winners being the number 1 and 2 seeds, because you look at it, sometimes the Metro is far better than the Atlantic. The Atlantic's far better than the Metro, and vice versa with the Central and the Pacific. Sometimes teams are just at different stages in the division. One division's going through a massive rebuild. One is all in right now. And this has happened multiple times in previous years. I'm going to go through it right now. In 2016, Washington Capitals, President's Trophy winners, number 1 seed. They had to play the Pittsburgh Penguins in the second round instead of the Rangers and the Islanders. And just overall in this division, in this conference, 4 out of the top 5 seeds were Metro teams. So the Washington Capitals win the President's Trophy. What's their reward? They play the eventual Stanley Cup champions in 2016, the Pittsburgh Penguins, in the second round, instead of having a far easier matchup in the New York Rangers or the Islanders. The New York Rangers would have had home ice advantage in a 1 through 8 system. Instead, they go on the road against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and even the Pittsburgh Penguins get screwed. Instead of playing a pretty bad Philadelphia team in the first round, obviously they eventually did win the Stanley Cup, so it didn't really matter for them. Instead of playing a Philadelphia team that would have been a walk in the park, they had to play a pretty good Rangers team. And then in the second round, they had to play the goddamn President's Trophy winner. So this stuff happens all the time. 2017, it was even worse. Washington, yet again, wins the President's Trophy, gets rewarded by playing a 111-point team, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who were the second best team in the entire NHL that year. They didn't have home ice in the second round. Columbus was the third best team in the conference, ahead of Montreal, who was the best team in the conference. You look at Columbus, what was their result for being a 108-point team, having 5 more points than the division winner in the Montreal Canadiens? They played the eventual Stanley Cup champions in the Pittsburgh Penguins and would obviously go on to lose. And then, so on. So this stuff happens. It hasn't happened in recent years because we obviously had the COVID divisions and all that. But this happens all the time. Different divisions, and these teams get screwed. Columbus, 108 points. They have to play a 111-point team on the goddamn road in the first round. That is absolutely ridiculous. If you're serious about crowning your best possible champion, and don't get me wrong, the best teams should still go on a Stanley Cup run, but it definitely favors some teams and hurts others in terms of having this divisional system and having a far easier path to a Stanley Cup final. And that matters if you're going through game 7 after game 7 because you're in a tougher situation versus, oh, I win in 5. Oh, I sweep the second round. Oh, I win in 6 the following round. That does matter. That does rack up miles on your body. So in terms of that is unfair. The other con in terms of divisional system, rivalries get stale. I know I just said, like, the rivalries are cool, but they do get stale. You look at it, going back to this, I love Crosby versus Ovechkin. Don't get me wrong. I'm very interested in watching them play. I hope they both make the playoffs, play in the first round this year. That'd be fantastic. But there was a point in 2016, 2018, some of those years that I just went over, and also when the Washington Capitals went on to go in the Stanley Cup, they played in the playoffs every single year. 3 straight years, we had Crosby versus Ovechkin. First time, I was like, everybody's like, oh my God, this is amazing. The divisional format's awesome. There's so many rivalries. Then it's like 2017, it's like, oh, them again? Oh, okay, we'll just have to beat them, I guess. Then it's 2018, you look at the schedule, you're like, damn it, like this just stinks. So some of these rivalries get overplayed, overused. Toronto and Boston played a bunch together. So I think going forward, especially it's only been happening for 9 seasons, but we've seen so many repeat matchups year after year. The Kings versus the Oilers just played back-to-back first-round matchups that wouldn't have happened in a 1-8 series. So I think overall, going back to the Docs, there's definitely some pros. The travel, easier to market rivalries. Divisions should matter. There should be some reward to winning your division at the bare minimum, but it punishes teams, very good teams that are in deeper divisions. The divisions are not all divisions are created equally, and the rivalries do get stale to a degree. So thank you for that question.